In this video, I want to talk about the Phoenix myth. Also because there is an X-Men movie called Dark Phoenix that is about to come out soon. Or maybe it's out already, I'm not sure. So, what is the Phoenix anyway? In ancient Egypt, they worshipped deities. They worshipped bird deities, cat deities, they worshipped many deities then. And there was this deity that this bird deity that renewed itself. In ancient Greece, they also worship this deity. There they called it the phoenix. And it goes like this. You have a bird, but actually it's a demonic entity, it's a Nephilim, but you have a bird. And this bird lives a very long time, but then the moment comes that the body of the bird expires. Now instead of just expiring and the bird is dead, the bird either decomposes and out of decomposed body it regenerates itself, or under stress it burns itself to ashes, and from the ashes it forms a new bird, a fresh one. Now, what does the Greek phoenix refer to? Because the phoenix is a Greek myth. In ancient Egypt, they had a similar myth. So when you read the translation of the Old Testament from the book of Job, it mentioned the phoenix, even though the phoenix was a Greek myth. Now, why did they put the phoenix there, even though the book of Job was written way before the Greek Empire? So it couldn't be referring to the phoenix itself. It is because the Old and New Testament have been translated by um, scholars that were learned in Greek traditions. Okay, that's why in the King James Version it mentions the phoenix in the book of Job. Even though that same word can also mean sand. But okay, I'm not going into the debate of that word over there. Know that the phoenix is a Greek myth, and you have a similar myth in ancient Egypt, but that's a bit different. Now, what is the relevance of the phoenix myth? It refers to a political model, because the ancient Greeks they had no king. Yet city-states, and some of those city-states had kings, and those city-states had colonies throughout Europe. So you can have Athens, and Athens has what you can say overseas villages in the south of Italy. So those overseas towns in the south of Italy were the colonies of Athens. You had Sparta, which also had colonies. You had Corinthia or Corinth. You had several major Greek city-states. A city-state was a polis, and each polis had its colonies. And later the Greeks also established other polises outside of the area of Greece. So the whole of mainland Europe became infested with Greek merchants. So the economy of what you consider white folks in ancient times were run by the Greeks. And eventually the Greeks ran the Mediterranean economy also. The Greeks became I would say, so successful, especially after Pythagoras, who established the first, what you can say, European mystery school in south of Italy. The Greeks became so important economically and in the financial world that I believe that Emperor was Asferos or Artaxerxes wanted to annex Greece, to annex all the Greek city-states, because he knew once you annex the Greek city-states, you have the whole of Europe and the whole of the Mediterranean. That didn't work out. And shortly after that, from Macedonia, or Macedonia, if you want to pronounce it, Macedonia was what you consider a Greek kingdom, and that from that Greek kingdom, the mainland of Greece was taken over, and there Alexander of Macedonia was born, or as we know him, Helios Apollo, the beast. Okay, and he, together with the Greek forces, took over the Medo-Persian Empire and established the heliocentric world order, which later was reformed to the Roman Empire, and that structure is in the world till this day, not in a form of a Roman state, but in a form of traditions and how the world is governed. You get what I'm saying here? So that's the history of the Greek civilization, how it became the world civilization and how it became the world system. Now, in ancient Greece, before the Greek Empire, they believed in political cycles. So every 1 or 2 generations, there was a certain cycle with traditions, and after a while, those traditions had to be renewed. So the leaders in the Greek world would orchestrate a crash, often a financial crash. How they do that? They would debase the coins, so people wouldn't trust the coins anymore. When people can't trust the coins, they can't trust the finances. The economy will suffer. Or they would raise the taxes so that most of the coins come back. So there's a lack of currency, so people can't trade, they can't buy stuff. So they would create a financial crash, and this financial crash would lead to stress. It would lead to disruption in social life. It would even lead to violence, and this will escalate. And when things escalate, those same Greek rulers, or I'm saying those Greek leaders, would intervene with the military, and now they would renew the system. They would renew the political situation. And because now the people were relieved from the financial crash, they just wanted to get along with the new situation, even though the new situation wasn't new at all. That's what the Phoenix refers to. It's a political cycle that's maintained by financial manipulation. So inflation, deflation are tools that were used by the ancient Greeks to keep this political cycle going. When the Greek Empire was established, this Greek way of doing stuff was enforced worldwide. And remember, all the leaders, all the elites of the world were Apollonian. If you were not an Apollonian, you couldn't have a throne anywhere. So the Greeks established those tiny countries in Central Asia, and they also established the Han dynasty, in which you have an Apollonian, yet an Asian Apollonian subcult in Luoyang, I believe this the name of the city was, but okay, I'm not Chinese, so I may pronounce it in the wrong way, but they had a Asian Apollonian subcult where you had the head of that cult, that was the emperor, was a son of heaven, it refers to the sun god Apollo, and he claims to rule on behalf of a certain deity. Now, who is the serpent? Satan. And that Asian Apollonian cult established the Han dynasty, and in Han dynasty, the Korean ethnicity became dominant in the finances and economics due to their lighter skin, because it's Apollonian, so it's based upon whiteness. Okay, so there this cyclical rule of daily life was introduced. The same was done in the Western Hemisphere, where later the Mayans emerged. So this Phoenix model, which refers to a political cycle, was introduced worldwide. And that's how it has been till this day. And till the early 1500s, that's how the world was run. So you had the Asian Apollonian cult in China, in the capital of the Chinese Empire that ran Asia. And you had the blue blood households who were all Apollonian throughout Asia. And they were all giving homage to the Apollonian cult that was Apollonian center in China. You had Japan was an exception because they had their own Apollonian center in Kyoto. That's the former capital of Japan. In Africa, you had several Apollonian centers, which were small towns throughout Africa, where the wizards would regulate stuff. And in the Western Hemisphere, you had the Mayans and you had the Incas, and you had, I believe, also the Miami tribe, but you had another tribe over there that was the Apollonian center. So worldwide, it was pairs and cycles that kept the world system going. Why did this cause disruption in the early 1500s? Because you had Protestantism came up, in which people were provoked to read the Bible for themselves. The Bible is translated in popular languages. I don't say those translations were of high quality, but nevertheless the word was translated. Again, because before that, if you had the Bible in your house, that quote unquote church in Rome would send his people and you would be either hanged or burnt or something very bad would happen to you. So people didn't even dare to touch the paper upon which the Bible was printed. But in the early 1500s, it happened rapidly. Protestantism grew, not only in Europe, also outside of it. Because, and though the Protestantism, people began to see through stuff. So then the Apollonian center of the world, which is in Rome, came with their, they came with, how do I say it? I won't say a police organization, but they came with a plan to restructure the world. And this restructuring ought to be conducted by a new cult that called itself the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits. In 1539, it was formally established, even though they were working on an organization earlier on. And this organization intended to get rid of Protestantism and to retain the cycles and patterns that were established regionally in the world, because the world was divided in regions already. You had kingdoms, empires, and some republics here and there, but that's the political division to trick the masses. But there were regions already in place. So they wanted to preserve the regions by masquerading as believers, as quote unquote people that follow God, just to hide what they were doing. So this new group, the Jesuits or Jesuitas is the concept in Latin, they contacted all the Apollonian centers throughout the world, telling them there needs to be a reform. And because all these Apollonian centers worship the beast, they complied. And the Jesuitas, they redivided the world in provinces. So you had regions, Apollonian regions, and now they restructured them into provinces. And they managed the provinces. So the world really existed out of provinces. But for the common people out there were kingdoms, empires, republics. But those divisions were only there for common people to identify with. But in fact, they were provinces. And each province had an Apollonian center. And from the Apollonian center, there were warlock cabinets assigned to local places. And that's how it has been since the mid-1500s. Okay? So in this reconstruction of the world, they had to reform the cycles a bit. So to keep this going, they had to centralize the Apollonian centers. So they couldn't let them remain regions. For example, for centuries, the Apollonian center in Asia, let's say China, did their thing, and they didn't have much contact with the Apollonian center of the Apollonian capital of the world, Rome. They didn't. Why? Because things just worked out. But now, though the Protestantism and though to a high movement of people throughout the world, they had to centralize all the Apollonian centers. And that would be difficult. Because that would mean they had to reconstruct the political landscape also. So some republics, some kingdoms had to disappear so that new ones would come. So how do they do this reconstruction of abolishing kingdoms, abolishing countries, forming new ones? through political cycles with the use of financial crashes. Financial crashes are common. The ancient Greeks, before the beast did it, after the beast, they've been doing it all along. And every time what they would call a global reconstruction happens, there would be a worldwide financial crash. For example, in 1672, the Dutch Republic collapsed. And with that, the Dutch fleet decreased also. That financial crash gave place for the increase of Britain. Spain remains the decision maker. Don't get it twisted. In the 17th century, it was the golden age of the Dutch, which was only 70 years. But they were not the political decision maker. Spain was the decision maker, and in economics, it was the Dutch age. The Dutch age ended, and the Spanish Empire was boosted. Okay? Moving further, in the 18th century, the wizards realized, you know what? We need to include common people more in what we do, or else it's not going to work. The population of the world is increasing also. We need to involve more people. Now, the wizards are not into recruiting females unless they are prostitutes. So they wanted men of good quality to serve them. Where did they find men of good quality? Amongst the common people. Because they know that amongst common people there are people of good quality, people that want to do the right thing. And the wizards wanted to get hold of all the good quality men worldwide. No matter which language you spoke, no matter from which ethnicity or which religion came from, they wanted all of them. Even believers, if possible. Not that they are fond of believers, they want believers also. But at the time, in the early 18th century, you had local fraternities here and there that helped each other out. For example, if you were a carpenter, you would join a carpenter fraternity because you had other male carpenters who would help you out. You would form a network of carpenters in a region, and you would help each other out. For example, if you built a furniture, how much is the price for it? How do you make sure nobody robs you? The fraternity is behind you. If you were a fisherman, you would join a fisherman fraternity. So you had small local fraternities all around. You can say you had thousands of them. Well, thousands. Well, you get what I'm saying. You had many of them. Let's say in a world population of around let's say 5 to 600 million people, you had thousands of such local fraternities because it operates on a local level. So the wizards wanted to get rid of all those local fraternities because they want to centralize everything, just like they centralized the Apollonian centers. But they knew that you needed to have fraternities because human beings need social networks. So they looked around to bigger fraternities which were operative more internationally. There were a few of them. One of them was Freemasonry. Now, Freemasonry wasn't centralized. You had a Scottish tradition and an English tradition that was dominant, and you had other smaller traditions. So the wizards realized, if we want to destroy all those local fraternities, we need to have a strong fraternity in its place. So they began to invest their finances into Freemasonry. They began to open many Freemason lodges, and they began to promote Freemasonry throughout the world. And because you had colonial empires, it went easily. So in the 18th century, Freemasonry boomed. And it became so dominant that it became an informal rule. They didn't write the rule in law, so it was formal so everyone knew about it, but they made it was an informal rule. If you want to be successful in business, whether locally or internationally, you had to be a Freemason. Why? Because Freemasons were now at the top in the Spanish Empire, in the French Empire, and also in all the empires. And the wizards, they observed Freemasonry. and the top Masons were also wizards, part of the shadow government. So being a Freemason didn't mean that you were part of the shadow government, nor part of a warlock cabinet. It just meant that you were part of a fraternity, and that fraternity was in the grips of the shadow government. You get what I'm saying here? And Freemasonry wasn't even that secret, like many conspiracy theories make of it today in the YouTube documentaries. It had to be open, or else it couldn't recruit people. So when many, when most of those small fraternities were destroyed, and now you have Freemasonry in its place, now you still had the, let me say, you still had this disconnect between the blue blood households, of which the Bourbon dynasty was a dominant one in the 18th and early 19th century, and the common people. Now, Freemasonry in this case became the tool to administer the common people and to police them. But the wizards knew you can't expect the fraternity members to police the people that go so far. So, from Freemasonry, they established local patrols based on the patrols that were active on slave plantations, and these local patrols became police corpses. And later centralized police corpses, and in the early 2000s they militarized police corpses because they were losing their grips on police corpses. So the police is an extension of Freemasonry. I hope that gets through to you now. But let's go back to the early 19th century. What was going on was that the common people were getting fed up. So they realized that a renewal had to take place. So what happened? The wizards caused a financial crash in the Spanish Empire and in the Kingdom of France, which was the French Revolution. There were real people rioting, don't get me wrong. There was contention that escalated, but the wizards pushed the contention until it escalated, and they spread the violence throughout Europe, and this caused fear in people, and this fear caused a stagnation in the economy and in finances. So this burning down happened in what we call the Napoleon era. Napoleon was placed there as a puppet to distract the people. And while this financial crash was going on, they reconstructed the world. And they realized that the Spanish Empire was effective. It was a powerful economic zone, but it was not effective in enforcing the myth of whiteness on the population, because the Spanish Empire was built by blacks under Spanish rule. So how are you going to convince the world that the number one economic zone of the world is, how are you going to convince the world of the superiority of whiteness if the number one economic zone of the world was built and maintained by blacks? How are you going to do that? It's not going to work. And so the wizards enforced a racial policy in the Spanish Empire that provoked a resistance from the black population in the Spanish Empire. And while all this was going on, the wizards had their warlocks that established small countries in the Spanish Empire, which became the Spanish republics, or what we today call Latin America. And Freemasonry received the supervision of those republics. The only reason those republics were established, because if you look carefully at them, they all had sun symbols openly in their promotion. It was meant as a reconstruction, because now it was through Britain and France that the myth of whiteness would continue in the world. The Spanish Empire was the number one economic zone, but it wasn't effective in keeping the world's population trapped. So the fall of the Spanish Empire was done as a financial crash, as a burning down to bring forth the dominant British and French empires in the 19th century. When that went sour, because it had to go sour once, you had the First and Second World War, in which there was another burning down. And after the First World War, many kings left their thrones, and the blue bloods remained in the background, and now the republic became the main form of government. That was to hide who was really ruling the world. So now Freemasonry also increased in influence because they were the ones running those republics. And who had a grasp on Freemasonry? Well, the shadow government did, or Jesuitas, however you want to call them. After the Second World War, there was a big bit of a change because popular racism went out of hand between the First and Second World War. So they realized we need to stop this. So after the Second World War, which was really meant as only just a transition, because the Second World War got so it got out of hand, and they had to get many non-whites involved to stop whites from killing one another because it went so out of hand. The wizards decided, you know what, we have to change our strategy. No more popular racism, only the institutions ought to be racist. And that's when the era of globalization ended in, with Hollywood and the United Hollywood as its base. So, just like the phoenix burns down to ashes and it starts over again, it's the same birds coming back but in another form. That is what's going on. And the 2009, that economic bubble that was enforced through the United States with the aid of Hollywood, that bubble has ended in 2008. So that's why Obama always talked about change. People couldn't understand what change was talking about. And now there is a new multicultural era that's enforced, of which 2019 until 2030 is the era in which it has to be established. Well, the wizards, they claim to be gods, but they don't really control everything, because believers are also active. So they hope that this new multicultural thing is established before 2030. But there's a lot of chaos going on. But 2020 is not a milestone of them. That's next year, in which the former American glory has to be over. 2020 is the date that popular racism has to have died out completely. So 2019 now is more a transition year towards 2020. So it's no coincidence that this X-Men movie comes out. X-Men, X refers to the beast, to Apollo. So Apollo's men, Apollonians. Dark Phoenix. Well, I hope it's clear to you now. Well, that's it for now. Keep agreeing with Christ, the real King, and be at peace.